thank you all for joining us. My name is Katie Bateman. I am a professional learning and research manager at the Museum of Science. And before that, my history is as a middle school science teacher. So I spent a lot of time working in schools in and around the Philadelphia area. The longest of my tenure was at a Title I school in the city of Philadelphia that served predominantly students who had just moved from both Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. And often, as we'll talk about, were coming to my classroom as WIDA Level 1 students who knew how to tell me what their name was, and they knew the words for bathroom and water when they came in on the first day. And we're sitting in my science class, eager and ready to participate. And we had to figure out, how do we make sure that we serve these students well and we give them all of the same opportunities as their students who already spoke English? So let's get started. If my buttons would work, hey now. Oh, there we go. All right. So our agenda for today, we're going to talk about why engineering. Why is that important? We're going to make sure that we operationalize or identify what do we mean by the term English learners and why are we using that particular term? And then we're going to get into kind of more conceptually what the value in engineering with English learners is. And we'll talk about the tools for scaffolding these students through the YES curriculum as an example. So we're going to show some examples from both student artifacts, from our written curriculum, and from video of one of the many classrooms that we have been able to visit. And we're going to let our students and our teachers show off how amazing they are. Because again, nobody wants to listen to me for an hour. So let's talk first about why engineer? Why are we doing engineering? So it's newly included in many standards. It is part of the next generation science standards. That is relatively new. We're going on about 10 years now. But in many states, it's just being adopted. So for example, here in Pennsylvania, we are in the middle of adopting what we're calling the STEEL standards, or the Pennsylvania version of the NGSS, because that's how we roll around here. We can't make anything easy. And so for a lot of teachers, this is brand new. We don't really include it in our pre-service teacher programs, but it's in the standards. We need to figure out how to give students access to it. But why do it even if it's not just a rule, if it's not a policy? Well, because there are so many life skills that come with engaging in engineering, which include problem solving, communication, and collaboration. You'll hear me mention a couple of times as we go through what I lovingly refer to as the COVID babies, those students who were doing school online through like first and second grade, second and third grade. And many of them, we hear from teachers about how much of a struggle it is for them to get these skills because they spent so much time on Zoom or with dividers up between their desks. So this is an opportunity for them to really focus on those skills while doing something fun. There is evidence that it improves both math and science achievement. So when you're talking to administrators and trying to bring engineering in, it's not just good for their engineering, it's good for their math scores and their science scores. And it promotes educational equity and increases awareness of STEM careers. You can't know you want to be an engineer if you don't know what an engineer is, if you've never had that experience, or you have a misconception of what it means to do engineering because of popular culture ideas of what an engineer, what it means to be an engineer. So speaking of English learners, right, there is a variety of different terms that we hear both in literature, in textbooks, in policy documents, in documents that we see at our own schools. And sometimes it can be a little confusing. And what do we mean by this? I'm going to wipe away some of these and focus on two terms. One, because it's the term in the policy documents, which is English learners, and one, which is multilingual learners, which is actually how we like to talk about these students. Using the term multilingual learners positions students as assets. They are mastering multiple languages, not that they need to be proficient in English. So it flips the script on things and say, they're doing something amazing, right? They are learning not just content, but they're learning two languages, especially when we look at our elementary age students. Well, they're coming in, regardless of what their home language is, needing to learn how to read and write in English. So why are we using the term English learners? Well, because the language of instruction here in the US is that of English, right? That's the language that we have. And so we look at the definition. This is from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Mathematics report on STEM and English learners. It is from 2018, but this still holds, right? An English learner is somebody whose native language is something other than English, and we'll talk about that in a second, and whose English proficiency might have, and I love this, consequences for success in the classroom in which the language of instruction is in English. So there's a lot of caveats there to what do we mean by that, right? It's acknowledging the fact that in the US, we're privileging English. It's acknowledging the fact that if that is not your home language, that could be problematic for your success in the classroom. But I want to make a point about language very quickly, because language in and of itself is an interesting term. There we go. Let's try that again. It's not a prerequisite or a precursor. It's a product. Because the language we need to also consider is the language of science that's happening for these students as well. And I will never forget being in my 8th grade classroom, and we were working, again, with my students who most of them spoke Spanish at home. And I had come across this resource that I had in both English and Spanish, and we sent it home, and my student brought it back to me. And I said, well, how did it go in Spanish? Did that help? And she said, I don't know these words in Spanish either. It was about, the epochs of the history of the world. They weren't terms she was going to be familiar with in either language because she needed to learn the science behind it as well. The Spanish might have helped get around some of that contextual language, but it also wasn't really helping her because she still needed to learn the science part of it and what we meant by those words. She had no thing to hang those words on with meaning. So let's talk about who English learners are in the US. First and foremost, they are not a monolith. There are over 400 languages spoken, and how many languages are in one classroom or in one state can vary very much. So we see that there's 5 languages in Mississippi, but here in Pennsylvania, we have the most. And there are 225 different languages reported being spoken as home languages in public schools in this state. And so we see the most prominent languages here. Our map is showing us the darker purple is where we see more concentration of English learners. And 10%, over 10%, and these numbers date from surveys you'll see in 2014, 2015. We're due for a reevaluation of that. In that time period, 10% of K-12 public school students were identified as English learners. That's over 5 million students. And again, that number varies by location. So we see that it's about 20% of the population in Texas, but West Virginia about 1%. And we see a variety of languages here. And for most of us, we tend to think of Spanish as being that predominant language. That's often how they're represented when we think about English learners, but they are not always the most prominent English learners in an area. So in Alaska and Hawaii, we have indigenous languages that are spoken most often at home. But in Maine and Montana and Vermont, we see Somali, German, and Nepali. So these are, different languages. So it's not like we can just translate everything into Spanish. There's a wide variety of languages. And the skill level of these students can vary greatly. So we think about this is just an example of the WIDA testing levels. So these are WIDA can-do descriptors, and they are ways that we can evaluate the English language proficiency for students in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So this is from the oral language or the speaking part of this. And so we see at the entering level, we're looking for students to be tracking the speaker. This is step 1. Can you follow the conversation? And can you share your ideas in some way whether that's speaking or we've gotten to graphic organizers, drawing. I would add gestures to that as well, and we'll see some of that later. And that goes all the way up to students who are, you know, emerging from these programs. They're just about ready to exit, and those students can all be in the same classroom. So how do we make sure that we are supporting all of these students? So let's think about, what does the research say? So people have studied this. Unfortunately, not as much in engineering. This is an emerging field. We still don't know a whole lot about engineering and English learners. But if we backtrack and look at it from the language of STEM, we see that we know, and some of these reflect what I mentioned at the beginning of this, right? It elevates the status of STEM in elementary schools. When we're fostering language through that, it allows teachers to say, hey, look, we're reading a comic while we're doing engineering. It allows for more time for that to happen. It increases students' content knowledge and language skills. So not just their idea of science, but also the language skills that they're using. And it increases the use of both academic language in the classroom. So we'll talk later about kids trying things on, right? They're trying on this academic and social language when they're engaging in STEM. And it supports teachers in reframing English learners as assets. So let's talk a little bit about what are the affordances of engineering with English learners in particular. And so this comes out of work by Kelly and colleagues from, I just lost the year, not that long ago, looking at what are these affordances of English learners? What are the things about engineering that support English learners in their development, full stop? And so the first of these is that it gives them those opportunities to practice social and academic language as they negotiate meaningful designs. So any of us that have ever tried to learn a second language, you pick up your, French 101 textbook, and it's like, where is the library? Maybe there's a context in which that's helpful for you, but here we're giving students the opportunity to use both the science and the social language in ways that are meaningful. So we're going to hear from a group of students who are working in one of our out-of-school time units. We'll visit this class a few times. And they're in Puerto Rico. This is a bilingual classroom, but these students are all at varying levels of bilingualism. At this point in the unit, they have tested their designs and they have been working on improving their designs. And so they're going to talk about flipping the failure.
Here is to have a good mindset about when things do not go wrong, you just improve them, you make them better, okay? And try again and again. ¿Qué cosa?
Pegamento. Tape. Voy a dar diferente la cosa. No, tape era pega. Tiene sido más difícil pegar. No, difícil, pero chiquitito. It will take longer than tape.
So one of the things, Fernando, one of the things that you should improve is the way, instead of tape, using glue, right? En vez de usar tape, usar pega. El problema es que la pega que pegaría esto es pega caliente, y that's another thing.
So one of the things that you'll notice this teacher do is that, first of all, she revoices some of the things that are happening, but she allows this conversation to happen without her for a little bit. The student who asked the question in Spanish, he had relocated from a different place where they only spoke Spanish. So he is just starting his English language journey. And his classmates know this, and they're there to support him, and they're trying to make sure that they're understanding tape versus glue. They had tape as a resource. They did not have glue. And so they go back and forth, and she lets that happen. And then she restates and summarizes what she heard and in English. So they've practiced it, and she's reinforcing both of those languages for all of the students in the room, not just the friend who needed a little more language support.
There is.
Oh, try again. So a second affordance of engineering is that it provides students with opportunities to participate in multiple modalities. we're going to watch a video here. These are two students who, again, are going to be speaking Spanish through most of the clip, and we have the subtitles at the bottom. They're working on our introductory activity from our out-of-school curricula, where they're trying to design a pencil case. They have criteria and they have constraints. Now, the little girl on the left, like our friend in the last video, has very limited grasp of English or little use of it. I did not hear her in the entire 2 weeks I was with this class use English. And so it sounded like she was very quiet and very withdrawn, but we'll see here when she's permitted to use her Spanish and to use all of these modalities, she's able to be a contributing member of the classroom.
I'm looking at you. I'm gonna pull out your packet, and I'm gonna look at your design. So it's gonna be a design on your page. That's your exit tip. I'm collecting your packet. This is your exit ticket out of class. I'm collecting your packets, and I'm looking at your design. So design on your page. This is your exit ticket. No license on your side.
So we're going to exercise the chat function here a little bit. And I want you to add, what did you notice? Which modalities did you see these students capitalizing on in order to be able to participate and share their ideas? So we'll give everybody a second. The chat should be working now.
Are you able to see it, Katie? Someone just
I
said
am,
gesture. Yeah. Okay.
Yep, I see gesture. Yeah, lots of gesturing. Yeah, manipulating the materials is a big one. So that's a little bit different than just the idea of gesturing, right? So they're pointing, they're doing things. Gesturing was a big, huge one. And Catherine, I like that phrase demonstrating, right? Demonstrating and then sharing. So they're passing these materials back and forth, and they are forming their ideas before they've been given the actual materials. So one of the things that we suggest to teachers with curricula is don't give them the materials because they will skip the planning and jump right into the building. And so they found a proxy for it. They grabbed some paper so that they could demonstrate to each other. And we also see the girl on the right. One of the things I'll point out is that she's using both languages, right? So she's, in terms of modalities, she's speaking, but she is using both languages. She's practicing in both places. And yes, lots and lots of images, right? And we'll take a look at those images in just a second, a little bit closer with our next affordance. So as they are finishing this, what we don't see in this clip is they go from taking that representation that they have folded, and they are now going to sketch it and record it in the engineering notebook that we see with the little girl on the right. Ooh, just gonna play that again. Come on. Thank you. There we go. And so in the engineering notebook, the students are able to represent their drawing. So if you look at this one right here on the top, you might notice, if you look at it long enough, right, these are little kids' drawings, that's what they just talked about. That is actually the little girl on the right. That is her drawing from her engineering notebook that we scanned in. And we see her creative use of language here, right? She's trying it on. She's experimenting with these words that she recognizes, but doesn't necessarily have a grasp of spelling on. And so one of the tools that's available to support that writing for our both English learners and just students in general, because some of these tools and resources may not be a familiar thing to them. Pipe cleaner's a big one that kids are like, "What? I don't know what this is. What is this called?" We have our visual materials glossary. And so they'll see pictures of the actual materials in front of them with the name of it, so they can help identify that thing. And so they weren't using that in the clip that you just saw. It was given out after that first day. And they did have it for their final design. And we see that sketch here, where our spelling is a little less creative, a little more normative, because they've had that materials glossary to support them. It's allowing her to practice her written language skills as well as her oral skills. There we go. All right, so the next one is about fostering risk-taking. So I just talked about she's trying those words on. She's trying to spell them. And that risk-taking in engineering is connected to that normalization of failure in engineering. And so we're going to look at a pair of students here. You're going to hear a little bit of overlap with the clip I showed before, but these two students right here, Felix, oops, I'm shaking my desk here, and Alana. And Felix and Alana were working together to design a rescue shuttle. We're back to our Puerto Rico group here. And this is Alana's notebook that we're looking at right here. And she has very detailed drawings. She's very self-reflective and very expressive. And so she's thinking about, like, what have they done? So this is her writing about her improvement. This is something that she has decided, like, what are they going to do to change? And we see that down here. And we'll notice that she says right here, still failed. Still failed. We made these changes, we still failed. And so this became this very normative thing. And we heard the teacher earlier start to talk about their mindset. So I'm going to let that play out. We're going to see little clips of Felix and Alana over the course of this build as they're reflecting on things.
How did you flip the failure today? How did you work on it? In your mind, how was your mindset? It was positive, it was negative. Huh? For the teams that didn't arrive on the target, how do you felt?
I didn't think it was gonna be that hard.
But what happened in the instant? Do you stay like down, like you don't want to do it again? So what your mindset was?
I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna try again.
Very good. So the same thing happened in the comic. They tried it again and again. And this happens all the time with scientists and with engineers. Not everything is gonna be perfect at the same time. And it happens to you every single day, right? Every single day you have to have a good mindset. What changes did you make to get your shuttle to land in your target zones?
We took the weights and it was big because it didn't go so far because of the weight that was putting it down. And also
So you make it more lighter and place just one wing, more fins. Do you have fun today? I can change.
4.2
Out of 5. Why 4.2? You didn't went to the, I think so.
So we see them walking through different phases of it. There's so many amazing things happening between these teachers and students here that we could talk about. I'm going to focus right now on the way that she responds to this and the way that Felix responds to this. They're not saying, I didn't get there and becoming upset. They became persistent. They were adamant. So the little clips that you see of them fixing, this is between flights at the testing station. They didn't get where they needed to go. They had some bemusement at the fact that they didn't get where they needed to go, right? You see her face kind of go, huh? They were like, no, let's fix it. We're going to do it again. I'm going to change this. And so that persisting through failure starts to happen. We see many of these great things happening across the board. That was consistent in every room I was in. Things would happen, kids would fail, and then they'd go, I got to fix it. This day in this school actually ends with a group of about 6 of them who kept going. The teacher let them, like, they were dismissed from their after school program. They were done. Parents were waiting, and they were not leaving until they hit that target zone. They were going to keep trying. And so we see that, kind of working as well in our language. And so we see here, now these are not Alana and Felix's, but this is their classmates, trying on again some of that language. This is something that, was not part of the materials guide, but they were really trying from it. They articulated that failure was part of being an engineer. It's part of that engineering identity. And when they're trying to talk in these reflections at the end of the unit, right, we see WELP, help, PEPOL, people. And that came from our friend that we saw in the earlier video, who was still really developing any grasp of English. That was very emergent for him. And he's trying it on. He's gotten some basic words. He's expressing himself in the English language in a written format, in something that is risky and new to him, and not being fully normative, but he's there, he's trying, and that's what's going to help him to develop those skills to be successful. Come on. There we go. So another piece of it is this idea of open-ended solutions allow for multiple perspectives and drawing on funds of knowledge. And so when we talk about funds of knowledge, if that's a new term to you, what we're talking about is this idea that students don't come to us completely blank. They come with assets and ideas that are part of either just their family culture, part of their larger culture, things that they are aware of because of their own lived experiences, and that they bring that to the classroom. And when we capitalize on that, when we allow students to flourish, we get to see all of these beautiful things happening. And so I'm going to go from right to left here. We see there's our rescue shuttles. We see the variety in these, right? We gave them very limited variables that they were kind of tweaking here, but they all came out looking very different and trying different things. Next to that in the center, we see some waterproof bags, different shapes, different ideas. And then on the left, we see something from our middle school unit on eco-friendly slippers. And this teacher very ingeniously has set up the display of their slippers like they are on sale at Foot Locker. It's a really cool design that she's kind of come up with. This was posted in their hallway. And we can see that there's a large variety in the designs, even just on the top of the slipper, that students came up with. And one of the things that is part of that is this idea of criteria and constraints, that even within these criteria and constraints, there is variety. And in particular, in the middle school units, the students co-construct these criteria and constraints. There's not a formal set of them that students have to use. As a classroom, they decide what's important to them. This gives everybody a voice. This allows everybody to think about what is important to them. So we heard a little bit of that being talked about before, I think, in our Puerto Rico school. One of the things that was important to them was flooding. Hurricanes happen in their area, and that's something that all of these students had experience with. Someone they know had to be water rescued, and so these rescue shuttles they were designing had meaning for them. And the criteria and constraints here at the middle school, where they are a little more mature and able to kind of co-construct these together, this allowed them the opportunity to take agency on their own experiences. All right, so one of the others is that engineering features allow for greater participation of ELs, allowing the community to see them in a new light. And this is really important in classrooms. Of all of the rooms that I have been in the last, bit with the Museum of Science, yes, the student that seems to succeed the most in every single classroom is the student who is being challenged to participate in normative ways in their regular day classroom, right? So in reading, in math, usually the kid that has had trouble sitting in their seat. And so what we're going to see here is I am going to let Nora, our teacher from Puerto Rico, and her student tell us about that experience for themselves.
He is a student who struggled a lot with English since we've seen him reading English confidently, everything, and seeing him so happy because his struggle through this and seeing that he created something that it went perfectly. He was super excited about it. after that show, the next day he was more confident in what he was doing.
What do you really like about the recipes or the cohetes?
Everything.
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 Tell me more about what does everything mean?
All the things.
All.
I like to wear. I think I'm gonna be ingeniero because I like all of the things que tienen que ver con la electricidad, con cosas que dan vueltas, cosas que prenden como las luces. A mí me encanta todo lo que tiene que ver con ingeniero.
Okay, so you like the engineering aspect of it, and you think about other areas of engineering.
Yeah, I like airplanes.
You like airplanes? You said you like something about electricity, electrical engineering. Do you think you want to do this type of activity again?
Yes.
Yes?
Totally yes.
And why?
Because it was super cool. I love engineering. I like to be like different things every day. I want to meet new people. I like to prove new things. I like to saber más ingeniería, sobre ingeniería, todos los días.
Yeah.
Yo me levanto y digo, ay, ojalá que aprendamos algo nuevo en ciencia.
And so, we refer to this young boy as Yael, right? And Yael at the beginning of the class was that kid that the teacher needed to say, can you go help him? By the end of the unit, other students, including Felix and Alana, were coming to him for advice on how to have a successful rocket, because he was able to show what he knows rather than having to sit in a desk and be constrained to writing it down or speaking in a certain normative way. He was able to use and draw on all of his language resources and all of his passions and interests and skills to show his class who he could be successful too. All right, so let's get into what are those supports that YES has to offer? What are these concrete suggestions and concrete skills, activities, scaffolds that we have built into our curriculum that can help people who maybe either are new to working with English learners or new to engineering or both, support their students in meaningful ways? So the first is that all of our curricular resources take this equity-oriented engineering approach. The model communicates how engineering learning, knowledge and facility with engineering concepts, practices, and skills can be developed through more equitable approaches. So our carefully designed curricula facilitate youth participation in what we refer to as socially engaged engineering, things that are relevant to their lives, the community, and the world. Through analysis and design regarding these applied programs, youth learn and use engineering knowledge as they engage in the engineering practices. And this participation and engagement are facilitated by asset-based pedagogies, focusing on the strengths youth bring to the engineering context. The model depicts the development of a positive generative engineering identity that is built on substantive learning of engineering knowledge and classroom discourse that situates youth as competent and engaged engineers, like we just saw from Yael. We're going to visit some of these domains a little more heavily. I will say, if you are interested more in the socially engaged part of that, that is our next webinar in February that we will make sure that you have information about. But let's think about those asset-based pedagogies, because what's really important here is those affordances that we just talked about are ideas and possibilities. It's only with teachers and curricula that capitalize on that in enactment that we actually see the realization of those affordances. So this is really about putting students, all students, being positioned as knowledgeable, being positioned as assets, being positioned as in a positive light. They're not lacking something. We're all learning something together here. They have different skill sets than you and I do. So this includes, again, capitalizing on that knowledge and experience they bring from their non-school contexts, supporting their developing vocabulary, and providing open opportunities to use their knowledge in disciplinary aligned ways. Because just learning the language is not enough. We need to also learn the science, the engineering, and the math. And these are in line with these affordances that we just discussed, and it supports the teachers in making these pedagogical choices. Okay, come on there, friends. There we go. So another way that that framework works is in thinking about engineering identity. Remember what you just heard Yael say. He literally said, I think I want to be an engineer. And so we want to give students that opportunity. We need educators to nurture that engineering identity. We can have successful participation in engineering challenges. It shows them that they're capable of engaging in that work. I can design a successful rocket. I can design a hand pollinator. I can make a circuit work to be part of a safety vest. So referring to them as engineers, and we heard our teacher say that a little earlier, she made that connection between the failure that her students experienced and the fact that that's what engineers do. That's a thing that happens to them every day. So let's talk about, excuse me, some of these very specific language scaffolds. So in our teacher guides, and this is an example from our 3rd grade dog doors, magnetic dog doors unit. This is from our introductory lesson. We have our language scaffolds. So we have this big idea, and we've represented matching the WIDA can-do descriptors, speaking, listening, right? All of those with little icons, what we would actually see, and what are those scaffolds and supports that might be there. So the engineering design posters, we saw the teacher referring to those. We have to have one here, right? This is a way to help students visually understand. We have pictures, right? We have the graphics and the words, just like that materials organizer. But there's other things too, right? The engineering notebook that we saw clips from of different students throughout the presentation. We'll get into the sentence stems. So one of the other ways is that key contextualization, right? Why do we need to design this thing? We need to give kids a reason to care. If we just tell them to build the thing, they might do it, but it's not going to be as meaningful. It's not going to stick with them. If you think about your own learning experiences, the things that tend to hang with us, like the thing you remember from 3rd grade, is probably the thing that was meaningful to you, that left a lasting impression. And so in our lower elementaries, there's picture stories, right? Whether that's on slides or a poster. Our 3rd through 5th grade has a comic, and in 6th through 8th grade, we use videos to help set this context. And why are these really important? Well, so for here, it's an example of how having these comics actually helped make the students feel seen. Students from this educator, this is again our rescue shuttles unit, was an educator in Texas who said to us, like, the comics actually had names that resembled our kids. The comics had people who looked like my kids. And the context in and of itself was something that they were also familiar with, right? They were experiencing flooding in Houston. These hurricanes are a thing that they're familiar with too. And so one of the other key pieces is this authentic vocabulary development. We are not sitting here and giving them a list of vocabulary words to memorize out of context. We're doing this through multimodal content presentation. So again, there's that, we see students here. This is that 3rd grade dog doors, magnetic dog doors unit. Can't see the words here, but I promise you they're there still, right? So we see like the different kinds of magnets, the different tools and resources that they're using. They have those pieces there. That's that contextualized vocabulary. These words are built into the comic. They're built into their notebook in meaningful ways. They have to use these words. They're not just there. They're useful. We have sentence stems. We'll talk again about those. I'm going to hit them in a second. And we talked earlier, we saw like all of those graphics, illustrations, and photos. So specifically for oral language, we're going to encourage the use of home language. We saw this with the 2 little girls earlier. When she was able to speak Spanish, she had lots of ideas. By having that opportunity to have a conversation in her home language where she felt more comfortable, she was able to fully engage in the classroom. Strategic grouping, right? Making sure that you have students who can work together well, who can support one another, who bring different strengths. Maybe you have a student who's really creative, but has trouble staying on task. And maybe you have a student who's really good at following the rules, but could use some creativity in their lives. You might pair them together to make sure that they can help support each other. They each bring something the other one needs to the partnership. And so we're seeing here these promoting equity tips that are embedded throughout the educator guide. So these discussion strategies, and then again, we have those projected sentence stems. So this is a sample from our educator slides. These are, as they're working on planning their device, these are some sentence starters for them. We don't want them to have to start from scratch if they're not familiar with collaboration and having these kinds of deep discussions about science and engineering. So we've given these ideas of things that they can use to start with each other. I think we should blank because blank. And a lot of these are also in their engineering notebook. And what we saw a lot was students would use that sort of like a fill in the blank. They would be having that conversation, negotiating what they wanted with their partners, and then they'd write it down in a little blank, record that idea before they made their sketches of their devices. So that goes to the supporting written language, right? So again, encouraging that home language use and translanguaging. We saw some students completing the engineering notebook in multiple languages. There's those sentence stems again. And so we see these examples here from our 5th grade in-school unit, which is about designing plastic filters, the context being Mobile Bay. And they're thinking about who is most harmed by pollution in the bay. And they have these manipulative cards. That's not all of them. That's just what fit on our slide today. And then they're working through recording their ideas about that here. So we see our sentence stems. We see these keywords to be able to be used. And they're able to kind of put things in order. They're ranking those cards and putting them in an order. So there's that use of visuals, the sentence stems. And then we see on the right-hand side, the follow-up to that as they're thinking about the pollution in their own community, like draw or list what you find. Use those multiple modalities. We can get kids labeling those drawings as a starting point to getting into actually writing sentences. So let's real quick just take a look at these language scaffolds across a unit. So this is from Sun Hats, the kindergarten unit in Yes. And we see some of these same illustrations. And this is, real photographs from the classroom. We see a kindergarten student with a sentence stem here. We see them doing that hands-on exploration, just like the older girls that we saw earlier, right? They're playing with those materials, figuring out, in this case, what makes shadow, what's going to keep them from being uncomfortable. We have our visual vocabulary, right? These are posted in the room for students to look at and reference. And we have graphics and illustrations so that they understand our goal is to design a sun hat and shade your head and keep you comfortable. So here's our students with their imaginary little hats on their head. So they're thinking about all of those things. And that story runs as a through line. We have these 2 students who are trying to design a sun hat like their teacher has. That's what they're working on through that unit. Now, I could sit here and keep telling you about this, but I thought I'd let some of our educators and students tell you for themselves what these language scaffolds look like in action.
Yeah, one of the materials within the Yes program that we used a lot was the materials list, where they got to some of the materials they didn't know.
Oops, excuse me. What did I just do? That just stopped.
The name for.
There we
they
go.
Were able to look at the pictures, then make the connection between the name, and then by the end of the unit, they were able to identify them by their name. So the pictures there really helped. The captions, the side little notes within their resources and their materials. And then also guiding things for the teacher to help add to their lessons in case needed. There were definitely a lot of supports, which was great.
I love the fact that it provided all of the sentence stems for students. I think that was kind of invaluable because even with our regular learners, having that kind of starter to know how to not only write their answers, but then also communicate their answers with their peers. So I noticed that our English language learners were very engaged in their projects. They were able to communicate their ideas through drawings and using the sentence stems. So within those packets, I love that they had the opportunity to draw out their ideas, write their ideas if they're comfortable with writing. If they're not comfortable with writing at this point, they're able to communicate it with their peers. So it really gives every student the opportunity to express their ideas in a way that they're comfortable to express their ideas.
Yeah, one of them.
So we'll wrap up with kind of the big idea. All youth can and should engineer. How we get them to do that is where we come in, right? How are we going to make sure that every student can engineer? We need to give them those opportunities and we need to give them the scaffolds. So I will open up the chat for questions in just a second, but let's just think real quick and reflect. Thinking about your own program, the students that you work with, the students that you represent, the communities that you come from, what tool did we see today that you think would be most beneficial to the people you might use this curriculum with? So I'll give everybody a minute to think about that. And then we'll do some questions after that. So just adding to the chat what tool we've seen today that you think would be beneficial for your students.
Got a couple here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Yeah, the visuals, the vocabulary sheets, that was huge, I think, for students. One of the things that I saw at STOP, which made my teacher heart happy, is can you spell regardless of their language skills stopped, right? It made it so that you weren't spelling things for kids. They were having that opportunity to own it themselves. Yeah, I'm gonna build on Matt's there, practicing the art of acknowledgement of different forms of expression and understanding with teachers. This is the one I think is that, like, we have to let students express themselves in ways that they are comfortable with. Not every student needs to get up in the front of the room and give a talk. Some students are much more comfortable drawing. Some students want to write all their ideas down. Some students want to stand there and tell you all day about everything that they have done because they're so proud of themselves. We need to find ways to open up opportunities for all forms of expression. And for teachers, sometimes that's a real shift in thinking, because we're used to grading things. We're used to saying, this is A work, this is B work, instead of thinking about process oriented. And that's where this can sometimes get a little more challenging. And Catherine, yes, the permission to translanguage, to use all of the resources available to them. That was a big key piece, I think, for most of the classrooms that I was in, was that if they didn't know how to say it in English, they would try it in Spanish and try to figure out a middle ground of what do we mean here? How do I understand the science regardless of my proficiency in any spoken, language? Yeah, and growth mindset's another one, right? Multiple teachers we worked with last year said to us, I'm going to start my year with the engineering unit because it was so helpful in students learning to communicate and talk to one another, and to collaborate. And this is where, again, that, like, my COVID babies term comes back in. These students who were not collaborating because they were sitting on Zoom, or we saw still the plastic dividers in that classroom in Puerto Rico, where they weren't supposed to touch each other. They weren't supposed to get too close. And it allowed them those opportunities to practice those skills and try them on